Hello everybody, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. It's time for some more fun with NVIDIA. So NVIDIA dropped the RTX 4090 first, then the RTX 4080 in a couple of different flavors. But now we've got the 4070 Ti. This particular model is from ASUS, part of their TUF gaming graphics card series. And there's a little bit of a story behind the 4070 and how we got here. But before we go down that path, let's take a look at the box here and see what all is going on. So when you get outside of your Founders Edition cards directly from NVIDIA, your different manufacturers launch their versions, and they each try to separate themselves from the other manufacturers with their own way of delivering their version of the card. And that includes cool things like software that can be used to control overclocking, fan profiles, stuff like that. Aesthetics, you've got your RGB effects, which are the ASUS Aura Sync. That's cool. You can make that all work with other ASUS products, of course. Durability, we've got long life capacitors, dual ball fan bearings, things like that. Cooling, each manufacturer tries to come up with the best cooling solution. Of course, you want to remove the heat, but the trick is to do it without making a lot of noise, so we'll have to check that out. Key features here, these are all things that are pretty standard now on your 40 series GPUs from NVIDIA. Let's see, some QR codes to scan for some other goodies. And again, there's a whole slew of interesting stuff here that goes along with the 40 series graphics cards from NVIDIA. All right, so now we can get it out of the box. This is the box that came out of the box we just looked at. And of course, there's the card. We've got one of the special 2-in-1 16-pin special connector there. I guess I can just go ahead and open that up. Now, this one has two ends that you supply power through. Of course, that end goes to the graphics card. The 4070 series then uses two. The 4080 will have three ends on it, and the 4090 has four. Sort of looks like Medusa. And this is a little Velcro strap for part of your cable management. It's got the TUF Gaming logo on there. And there's one other thing down in the bottom. This little device is actually made to support your graphics card. I think this pulls out, yeah. So you can adjust it, tighten this down, and it holds the end of your graphics card up because these things are kind of bulky and heavy. So it just gives you a little extra support. All right. Now we can get the card out. Looks like there's some more goodies down here in the bottom. But the card is sealed in this bag, so let me get that open. And the card is out of the bag. Now it still has all these protective plastic pieces on. That's why it looks a little extra shiny and glossy there. So I'll get those peeled off here in a minute. We got three front fans that blow the air across that large heatsink. And it looks like the back has the same glossy protective coating. I'll have to get that peeled off. You can see this section here on the end is open to allow air to pass completely through. And then on the business end here, we've got 1, 2, 3 display ports and 2 HDMIs there sort of centered up. Now this sort of looks like a 3-slot card. I mean, it's definitely 2, 2.5. I guess really that's pretty much a third slot that'll take up. We'll have to see what that looks like on the motherboard. The other thing I notice here is it's considerably lighter than the 4080 series. All right, well, I got all of the protective plastic removed from the graphics card. This is the little packet of information that comes with it. There's some sort of a little card here. Almost looks like a little trading card. It's got some information about the graphics card there, or I guess what TUF Gaming is. There's a warranty pamphlet, a quick start guide, which looks like there's a ton of info in it, but it's really pretty simple. It's just in multiple languages, so that's why there's so much. But it's really just very basic, how to plug the card in, that kind of stuff there. Graphics card holder, that's this little guy right here. This sort of shows you how to use it, and it supports the graphics card in a case where your motherboard is vertical. Your case is, or your graphics card is sort of cantilevered out there, and the end of it can get a little heavy, and you don't want it basically flopping around, so you use this little device here to support the end of the card. Okay, certificate of reliability, basically telling you what the components, what standards the components meet. And then there's this little guy here. I actually had to look up and see what this is. I guess it's like a cell phone holder, something like that. You scan the little code there and it'll show you how it works. Okay, so of the cards that are currently out there, we have a sample of each one. We have a 4090, a 4080. This is also a 4080. This is from MSI. And then we have the one we're looking at today, the 4070 Ti. And rest assured there will be other varieties and variations out there, but this is pretty much what's out there now. These are the Founders Edition cards from NVIDIA. They look virtually identical. In fact, the only way you can tell them apart is if you look at what's printed on them, the 4080 and the 4090. Otherwise, physically, on the exterior, they are identical. Now, when I first started comparing these two cards, I thought the 4090 may have felt a little heavier. I think some of that is just the psychology of thinking, since it's the bigger, beefier card, then it should be heavier. Well, I got a scale here and I weighed them just to see if there is a difference or if it's within the margin of error. Actually, let me set this. Okay, there's the tare. And we're using ounces, so right now this is coming in about 76.74 ounces. That's the 4090. And the 4080 is coming in at about 75 ounces. So it's just slightly less, an ounce and a half less. So I don't know if you can really detect that by picking the two cards up, but the 4090 in this particular case does weigh slightly more than the 4080. If anyone is interested, and while we're at it, let's just weigh this other 4080. It's actually heavier, yeah, coming in at 83.3 ounces. And the 4070, now this one is definitely lighter, as you would expect it to be. This one's coming in at 43, almost 43 and a half ounces. So it is definitely the lightest of the cards that I currently have now. So does that really matter that one card is heavier than the other? Not really, but it is interesting. So if we look at the difference here between, these are the aftermarket cards, and again, this is from ASUS, this one is from MSI, and this is the 4080 and this is the 4070 Ti. So you can see the 4080 is significantly larger than the 4070. It would be interesting to have an ASUS card in the 4080 flavor to see if it physically is much different. I suspect it isn't. My guess is it's pretty much the same envelope as that 4080. But the 4070 here, when we look at it a little more closely, now that I got all the stickers and stuff off of it, what I notice here, and it's easy to overlook, there's this tiny little switch right here, and it says performance mode and quiet mode, and there's a little tiny slider switch that you can toggle one direction or the other. So we'll have to play around with that. We've got the large opening here on the back to pass air through, so this back fan here is moving air through the card and right out the back of the card, whereas these two, when they push the air against the heat sink, of course it's coming out the top and the bottom and a little bit out the end of the card there, which is the same thing that this 4080 does. This one has a similar approach. There's an exhaust area here on the back for that last fan. And looking at the top of the card, your power connector is here, and I'll talk about the importance of making sure that your power plug is fully engaged in the socket. The back of the card, we've got this heavy metal chassis, this frame here, this exoskeleton that helps stiffen the card and keep it from flexing at all. So that's sort of a nice feature. Looking at the business end here, so we've got a DisplayPort at the top and two, boy, that's in there pretty good, two HDMI ports, and then two more display ports. So you've got a total of 3 display ports and 2 HDMI ports. It says stainless steel 304, so that's some pretty tough stuff. And something else interesting, there's actually a latitude and a longitude right there printed on it. If you type that in and look it up, it's somewhere in Taiwan. I'm not sure if that's the parent company, ASUS, or it looks like it's Pegatron, maybe a related company. I think Pegatron and ASUS were related at one point. And down here it says CG0008, and I'm not real sure what that is. I feel like I should know what that is, but I don't. And here's what it looks like with the fans removed, exposing the heatsink. You can see they've got some little isolation pads there so that when these are up against the heatsink, there's no vibration or anything like that. And we've got the power for the fans and the RGB effects that come together. But this is actually a very sturdy piece. And at first I thought it was plastic, but this is actually a casting, so that's impressive. And here's what the card looks like. Here's your heat sink. We've got 3 heat pipes on the right, and we've actually got 6 heat pipes that come out of the base on this side. So we're really maximizing the cooling capacity. There are also a couple of stiffening ribs that join the 2 sections of the heat sinks so that we get some additional rigidity there, so we don't have any flexure of the heat sinks. And on the back of the card, now these are exposed whether the fans are on there or not, but these are, it looks like 3 positions if you're going to use an external bracket to support the card, depending upon what case you're using. And in addition to these 3 holes here, these appear to be M3s. There are 2 more tapped holes back here that are also M3s, so I'm not sure exactly what those are for, but they are there. So you've probably already heard the story behind the naming and how we got to a 4070 or 4070 Ti. So there was the 4090 and then the 4080, and it came out in a couple of different versions initially, and then there was an unlaunch and they pulled one of them back, and I think that's how we have the 4070 now. So you know, usually you have your different price points versus performance, so that people have options. If you don't have all the money to drop on a 4090, well then maybe a 4080 is more in your ballpark. If not, you've got a 4070. So the question then becomes, well, what's the performance difference? Where do you get the most bang for the buck? And that is what we will try to help determine. And I tell you, there's plenty of opinion and discussion about the 4080 unlaunch, so you can read up on that if you haven't already and form your own opinion. But anyway, so the card is plugged into the motherboard, into the PCIe slot, and you can see there's a little red LED right there, and that's reminding you that your power connector here is not plugged in. So if you see that red LED, that should alert you to the connector, and that's what I want to talk about next. So here's the connector, and it's very important that this is plugged in properly. And you want to avoid bending this area here any more than absolutely necessary. You want to try to keep from stressing that. But when you plug it in, you're looking for 2 things. You're looking for complete plug engagement, and you're looking to hear, and you can feel a slight click when this is fully engaged. So you see this little tab right here will lock into position, and you can hear a very, very slight click right there. It's not very loud, but you can hear it and you can feel it a little bit. But what you're looking for is this area right in here. There should be no gap at all, no daylight. It should be flush between the plug fully engaged with the socket here. So again, no gap down here at all. And you may have noticed the little red LED down here. went out as soon as we got the power connector plugged in. And now we're ready to power it up. You can see the RGB effects here and along here. And as far as the fans are concerned, there isn't any RGB stuff going on there. Now you may have noticed, or you may not have noticed, the fans here all spin different directions. Well, we have counterclockwise, we have clockwise, and we have counterclockwise over here. And the reason that is done, sometimes when you have 3 fans all spinning at the same speed in the same direction, you can get some weird resonating frequencies going on and some weird fan noise. So this is one way to help combat that. When you have one fan spinning in a different direction, that can help reduce the resonating frequencies. And of course, after you get it powered up, you want to go in and into your GeForce experience and make sure you've got the latest driver for your graphics card. And then when I have my GeForce experience open, I hit the Alt-Z on the keyboard to bring up the overlay, and then I go into the performance mode, enable the automatic tuning and let it do its thing. And then I have Tech Power Up GPU Z also opened up so that I can see what's going on, just to sort of verify that everything is working properly. Okay, so now we'll take a look at the sound from the card. Normally, your card's not going to be out in the open like this. It's going to be in a case. So when your fans are running, probably really won't hear them unless you've got them cranked all the way up. So right now, of course, they're not running. So let's look at the decibel meter. Now there's about 3 feet between the card and the decibel meter here. So let me shut my mouth for a moment. We're right around 35 decibels for the background noise. Now we'll go ahead and let's just crank the fans up to 50%. So there's 50 right there. So that's pretty quiet. I'm standing a little bit back from the fans and I can barely hear them. So let's see what the decibel meter shows. So 2.5 decibels at 50%. Let's go ahead and run it up to 75. So 74, 75, all right. Okay, so 75%, I can hear them. Again, the card's right out in the open. The decibel meter shows 46, 47. Now let's go ahead and push it to 100%. And normally you're not going to be operating your fans at full blast like this, but oops, went the wrong way. Okay, 100. Let them spool up. And now let's see. So we're right at about 55 decibels, so that's about a 20 decibel swing from 0 RPM up to 100%. So like I said, normally, your card's going to be in a case, and depending upon what case you're using and how many fans you've got in the case and what speed you run them, the sound generated by this card, of course, I don't think would be much of a factor. Okay, so let's say normally you're gaming, your card builds up some heat, the fans kick on, then what happens? Well, right now, the way the card is set up, I believe the temperature that the fans should kick on when it hits 55 degrees Celsius. So what I'll do is I'll run the MSI combustor, which will stress the graphics card, sort of simulate game playing, and I'll look and see what temperature the fans come on, and then I'll look to see what temperature is maintained. So the temperature should rise a little bit above that 55, but how much? So let's just see. All right, so first thing we'll do is get the benchmark running. So as soon as we hit 55 degrees here, we're at 38, there's 55. We should see the fans kick on, and right there they go. So what I'll do is monitor the temperature. So we're at 60, 61, and let me bring up my monitoring software here. Did I lose my mouse? There it is. Okay, hardware info. What I want to do now is look at the fan speed. Oh, here it is. It was hiding from me. Okay, so right now we're at 65C. Fan speed, we're about 1400 RPMs on the fans. And we're holding about 65, 66 degrees Celsius. Let's just watch this for a little bit. Okay, I've been running a little while now, and we're really holding. We're holding at about 68, 67, 68 degrees Celsius. Fan RPMs have pretty much stabilized around 15 to 1600 RPMs. And now we'll take a look at power usage. Now this little board here, this is the PCAT, which stands for Power Capture and Analysis Tool. This is provided by NVIDIA for testing. You can see the little display there shows in real time the wattage that is being used by the card as well as the voltage. So the power comes in from the power supply, goes to this monitoring card, then it goes right back out to your graphics card. So we can monitor in real time what sort of power is used. So what that means is I can actually bring up the software interface. This is the PCAT interface. You can see right now at idle, we're hardly using anything, less than 20 watts, 15, 18 watts. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put the stress test on here using the MSI combustor. Let me fire this up, and then we can take a look at the power being used. So we already hit 55 degrees. The fans have kicked on. You can see the spike here where we jumped up, where the stress test started. Let me reset the numbers here. So we can look at the average power used. So we've peaked so far, we've peaked at 297 watts. It may bump a little higher than that. Yeah, there it just went to 299. So we may hit a little over 300. But the average power, we're right at about 279, 278. Somewhere in that range. It may average out back to around 275 after we let it run for a little while. And the PCAT actually has a special riser there, you can see, that raises the card off the board considerably, so I had to sort of rig up something to support the card while I'm using the PCAT module. So I've been running for a while, and we have peaked just a tad over 300 watts, but again our average is around 278. And we continue to hold at about 68 degrees Celsius, and the fans are just absolutely whisper quiet. So how does the 4070 Ti compare to the 3070 Ti in terms of power usage? Well, let's find out. And now the 3070 Ti is running the same test, and it looks like our average is about 288 watts. We peaked out at 316. So we're just a shade above where the 4070 Ti is in terms of power usage. And after I kill the stress test, we're idling at about the same power usage between the 3070 Ti and the 4070 Ti. Now, one thing I noticed in comparing the 3070 Ti to the 4070 Ti, I bump into the camera here, the fan curve. Now, I didn't touch the stock fan curve on the 3070 Ti, and it's holding at about 77 to 78 degrees C, so we're about 8 or 9 degrees warmer using the stock fan curve. Now, I can override it and really kick the fan speed up and bring the temperature down, but then the card starts to get a little noisy. And to maintain the same temperature, so if I want to hold this card at the same 67, 68 degrees Celsius that I held the 4070 Ti to, I've got to crank the fans up manually. I've got to push them up to 70%. So they're a little louder. You can hear them. It's not terrible, but there's definitely a difference between the two cards as far as keeping them at the same temperature. But that is not a surprise because these are two very different cards. And this little switch right here, whoops, right there, it's upside down, but you can see where it says performance and then quiet. Performance mode and quiet mode. So I've run this card in both modes to see if I could tell a difference. And it seems to hold the same temperatures. The fan RPMs seem to be the same. The starting temperature seems to be the same. I can't really tell that much difference. So if it's doing something, I can't see what it is. Now, as far as the clock speeds in the NVIDIA Performance Tuner here, I'm able to see all the way up to 2820, 2835. So is the overclocking card worth the extra money? Do you really see a difference? It's hard to say. It may translate into a few more frames per second. Is it worth the extra money? Maybe, maybe not. If you can get a good deal on it, I would say sure, why not? But I don't know that you'll see a huge difference. I guess it depends on what game you're playing. So the takeaway is you have a much more powerful card, a much more capable card that uses less energy than the previous version. Now, as part of the review, I always like to show off whatever components I'm reviewing in a system build if I can. So I will go ahead and get this card installed in a case so you can see what it looks like. For anyone interested, the power supply we're using is the MPG A1000G. This has 1,000 watts, which should be plenty of horsepower to drive a card like this. And the cooler on this system from MSI is the MAG Core Liquid C280, and you can see it sort of hiding up there in the top of the case. The motherboard I'm using for this system build is the Z790 Carbon Wi-Fi from MSI. It is a DDR5 motherboard, and the CPU is a 13900K from Intel. And for the system build, the case is the Secura 500P from MSI. There you can see a little bit of the RGB effects going on from the 4070 Ti. And looking inside, you can see how the graphics card looks in a system build. We got a little bit of RGB there. It's a little easier to see when you get down at an angle. Now, a couple of things to point out. You really want to keep from stressing your power cable. Now, this is the power cable that came with the power supply. But you want to avoid bending this cable any more than necessary, and you want to avoid putting any stress on your connector and socket. You really want to avoid that. So you need to make sure you have a case that has the right depth for a card like this with a cable that's coming out in this type of an orientation. And this case is fine. We're nowhere near hitting the cable, but that's a consideration you need to make when you're selecting a case or you're putting this into a pre-existing case. Either way. The second thing is a card like this is capable of dumping a lot of heat into your case. So you need to make sure you have a case that has really good airflow. You want to put as many fans in there as you can, keep them rolling to keep the air moving through your case. We've got 3 120s in the front in this particular case and a couple up there on the radiator, a couple of 140s, and then there's a 120 in the rear. But you really can't have too much airflow, and you really need to keep that heat pushed out of your case as best you can. So remember that little support that I showed at the beginning of the review? This is supposed to hold up the end of your graphics card when it's in your case. Well, I was supposed to show that in the system build, and I forgot, so oops, but I've already got the system torn down, so yeah, sorry about that. Here's one that comes with the RTX 4080. This is the Supreme X from MSI. It's the same idea. It's meant to support the end of the graphics card. Now, this graphics card is considerably heavier than this one, so you can probably get by without using this, but it's a good idea. And something else I figured out, if you loosen this all the way up, this pulls out, and on the end is a little baby screwdriver. Okay, it is benchmark time. I ran some synthetic benchmarks and some gaming benchmarks, so let's take a look. Okay, let me zoom in a little here so you can actually see the numbers. Alrighty, okay, so I compared this card, the 4070 Ti, to the latest cards that have been released here, the RTX 4090, the 4080 Supreme X, the 4080. These two here are both Founders Edition cards. Here's the 4070 Ti. I threw in my older 3070 Ti. And the pricing here, of course, tends to vary depending upon what kind of mood Amazon and Newegg are in. But these are sort of general prices that I've seen out there. So you can sort of compare the specifications between the cards. And of course, the 4090 here is the king of the hill with its specifications. But the 4070 Ti, for me, what I like to compare it to is the previous generation. So I like to compare it to the 3070 Ti. And you can see it does have some considerable advantages in terms of clock speed. Of course, we've got a different processor altogether. We've got considerably more transistors, and we've got more memory. Okay, so the way I did this, I've got the synthetic benchmarks on the top half, the gaming benchmarks are on the bottom. The monitor I used is a Viotech 3440 by 1440, 34-inch monitor, 144 hertz. In testing, what I would do is I would set everything to the highest settings in each game or each benchmark. And whether that was ultra, super ultra, insane, whatever the mode is, I would keep it the same across each one of the tests. So for me, one of the things I wanted to sort of check out was how this card sort of compared to the 3070 Ti, the previous generation. I mean, we already know against the 4090 and the 4080, of course, it's going to be a significant chunk lower. But when you look at the previous generation, the 3070 Ti and the 4070 Ti, and again, this is the Founders Edition, you can see the differences here on the synthetic benchmarks for Blender. There's quite a jump in most of these. 3D Mark with DLSS off and on. Of course, on the 3070 Ti, I could only run it in DLSS 2 because DLSS 3 does not function. So this one here, you can't really compare those numbers. But when we get down here to the VR Mark, you can see the numbers aren't a whole lot different here until we get down to the Blue Room. There's a little bit of a bump. Borderlands 3, you can see there's a pretty good jump on your frame rates. F122, the average frames per second. Of course, I couldn't really run that with the DLSS on, so I had to run it with DLSS off. And again, you can't really compare those numbers. Down here, Cyberpunk 2077, sort of the same thing here. We've got significant jump in the frame rates. Now, when you compare the 4070 Ti again to the 4080, the other cards in the 4080 series, or 4000 series, when you compare to the 4080s and the 4090, you can see again we have some big increases in the frame rates. But again, as far as the 4070 performance-wise in gaming, are you going to be able to tell that much difference between 128 and 289 frames per second, for example, on F122? Probably not. 128 frames per second is screaming fast. The same thing here with the other games. Borderlands, yeah, 193 is awesome, but 102 is nothing to get concerned about as far as am I going to be able to play the game or not. So the 4070 Ti scales in line with what you would expect across the other cards in the 40 series. It'll be interesting to see, and I'm sure we'll see it here before long, what the 4060 and the 4050 cards look like. I haven't seen any specific release dates yet, but I'm sure we'll see them here before long in 2023. Okay, quick last minute edit. There are a couple of benchmarks here I actually forgot to run. So one of them is the Octane bench, the other is the V-Ray GPU RTX. So I ran those on each one of the cards, and here are the results right here. So the V-Ray GPU RTX, you can see the 4070 Ti comes in at 3059, a pretty good bump up above the 3070 Ti. And you can see again the scales right up the ladder to the 4090 at the top at 5587. Same thing here with Octane bench. The 4070 Ti we're at 735, which is close to double, not quite, the 3070 Ti. And again, we scale right on up to the top number here at 1250 on the 4090. All right, so overall, I think this is a nice card. It does everything that it's supposed to do. I think for most people, you're going to be able to bang through most of your games at high settings and have a good experience. Now, there's a lot of discussion and debate on the pricing. Is it fair? Is it overpriced? Is the bang for the buck really there? And anytime something new comes out, doesn't matter if it's new Corvette, new Mustang, new flat panel TV, new iPhone, there's a price to pay to get that latest and greatest if you just absolutely have to have it. That's just the way it is. So you have to make that decision. Do you have the money to shell out on a card like this? Do you wait and see if something else comes out at a better price point, or if there's a sale? That's really a choice you have to make. So if a 4090 or a 4080 are a little too spicy for you right now, you do have another option, which is the 4070. So I would give this the Overclockers Club Gold Award. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.